Emeka had been crushing on Nneoma for what felt like an eternity. They were in the same class at the University of Lagos, and every time he saw her, his heart skipped a beat. He had mustered up the courage to write her a love letter, pouring his heart and soul into the words. As he walked across campus, letter in hand, he couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and nervousness. He had planned to give it to her after class, but as he approached the lecture hall, he got distracted by his friends. In the chaos of greeting them, the letter slipped from his fingers and flew out of his hands. Emeka watched in horror as it sailed through the air, landing in the hands of the wrong person, his nemesis, Tunda. Tunda, known for his mischievous grin and love of pranks, looked at the letter and raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" he asked, a sly smile spreading across his face. Emeka's heart sank. He knew he had to get the letter back, but Tunda was already walking away, letter in hand. "What are you doing?" Emeka asked, chasing after him. Tunda just laughed. "I think I'll deliver this letter for you," he said, and with that, he disappeared into the crowd. Emeka was left standing there, feeling helpless and worried. What had he just gotten himself into? Tunda walked across campus, letter in hand, whistling a tune. He had no idea who Nneoma was, but he was determined to cause some chaos. As he approached the girls' hostel, he spotted a girl with a similar name, Nnemdi, sitting on a bench. He walked up to her and handed her the letter. "Hey, I think this is for you," he said with a smirk. Nnemdi looked at the letter, confused, and then began to read. Her eyes widened as she realized what it was. "Who gave you this?" she asked Tunda, her voice shaking. Tunda just chuckled and walked away, leaving Nnemdi looking stunned and embarrassed. Meanwhile, Emeka was frantically searching for Tunda, determined to get the letter back. He had no idea that Tunda had already delivered it to the wrong person. As Emeka searched, he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. Little did he know, his love letter had just set off a chain of events that would change everything. Nnemdi's eyes scanned the letter, her face growing hotter by the second. She couldn't believe what she was reading. The letter was passionate, romantic, and intimate. It was clear that the writer had poured his heart and soul into it, but it wasn't meant for her. Nnemdi felt a mix of emotions, embarrassment, guilt, and curiosity. Who was this person who had written such a beautiful letter? And who was the intended recipient? As she read the letter again, she noticed the writer's name at the bottom. Emeka. She wondered if she knew him. Just then, her roommate, Emeka, walked into the room. "Hey, what's wrong?" she asked, noticing Nnemdi's distressed expression. Nnemdi hesitated, unsure if she should share the letter, but something about Emeka's kind face made her trust her. She handed Emeka the letter. Emeka's eyes widened as she read the letter. "Wow, this is intense," she said. "Who's Emeka?" Nnemdi shook her head. "I have no idea, but I think we need to find out." As they pondered what to do next, Emeka was still searching for Tunda. He had no idea that his letter had already been delivered to the wrong person. Little did he know, his life was about to get a whole lot more complicated. Emeka finally found Tunda in the school cafeteria, laughing and joking with his friends. Emeka's anxiety turned to anger as he approached Tunda. "Tunda, what did you do with the letter?" Emeka demanded. Tunda looked up at Emeka, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Oh, you mean this letter?" he asked, pulling the letter out of his pocket. Emeka's heart sank. "No, you didn't deliver it, did you?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Tunda shrugged. "I might have gotten the name wrong, but don't worry, it's not like it's the end of the world." Emeka felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice shaking with anger. Tunda's grin faltered, and he looked at Emeka with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Dude, what's going on?" he asked, but Emeka just turned and walked away, leaving Tunda looking bewildered. Meanwhile, Nnemdi and Emeka were trying to figure out what to do with the letter. They decided to try to find Emeka and return the letter to him, but they had no idea where to start. As they sat in their room, brainstorming, Nnemdi couldn't shake off the feeling that she'd stumbled into something much bigger than herself. Little did she know, her life was about to intersect with Emeka's in ways she never could have imagined. Nnemdi and Emeka decided to start their search for Emeka in the university's student union building. They asked around, showing Emeka's name on the letter, but no one seemed to know him. As they were about to give up, they met a friendly-looking student who introduced himself as Uchichi. "Hey, I couldn't help but overhear you guys talking about Emeka. I think I know him," he said. Nnemdi's heart skipped a beat. "Really? Where can we find him?" she asked. Uchichi nodded. "He's usually at the library, studying for his exams. But be warned, he's a bit of a loner." Nnemdi and Emeka exchanged a look, then thanked Yuichi for the information. They made their way to the library, determined to find Emeka and return the letter. As they entered the library, Nnemdi's eyes scanned the room, searching for Emeka. She spotted him sitting at a table, surrounded by stacks of books. He looked up, caught her eye, and quickly looked away. Nnemdi felt a flutter in her chest. There was something about Emeka that drew her in. She nudged Emeka, and they both walked over to Emeka's table. Emeka, Nnemdi said softly, trying not to startle him. Emeka looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in Nnemdi and Emeka. Can I help you? He asked gruffly. Nnemdi hesitated, unsure of how to start. But then she remembered the letter, and her purpose became clear. We need to talk to you about something, she said, her voice firm. Emeka raised an eyebrow, but he nodded curtly. Okay, what is it? Nnemdi took a deep breath, then handed Emeka the letter. This belongs to you, she said. Emeka's eyes widened as he took the letter, his face pale. Where did you get this? He demanded. Nnemdi explained how Tunda had delivered the letter to her by mistake and how Nneoma read the letter accidentally because of a marker. Emeka listened intently, his expression growing more and more agitated. As Nnemdi finished her story, Emeka slumped back in his chair, looking defeated. I am so sorry, he muttered. Nnemdi felt a pang of sympathy for Emeka. She could tell that he was genuinely distressed. But then Emeka spoke up, her voice sharp. Sorry? You're sorry? You have no idea what you've done. Emeka looked up, startled, as Emeka continued. This letter was meant for someone else. Someone who was meant to receive it. Nnemdi's eyes widened as she realized the implications. Oh no, she breathed. Emeka's face went white. Who was it meant for? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emeka's expression was grim. That's what we need to find out. Emeka's eyes were wide with anxiety as he waited for Emeka to reveal the intended recipient of the letter. He had a feeling that this was going to be bad. Nneoma, Emeka said finally, her voice firm. Emeka's heart sank. Nneoma was the girl he had been crushing on for months. He had written the letter in a moment of passion, pouring his heart and soul into it. Now, he couldn't bear the thought of Nneoma reading those intimate words, knowing that they had been meant for her eyes alone. What am I going to do? Emeka asked, feeling like he was in a nightmare. Nnemdi placed a comforting hand on his arm. We'll figure it out together, she said. But Emeka knew it wasn't that simple. He had to find a way to get the letter back from Nneoma, or risk losing her forever. As they sat there, trying to come up with a plan, Emeka couldn't help but think about Nneoma. What was she thinking right now? Had she read the letter? And what would happen when she found out that he had written it? Emeka's anxiety grew as he walked across campus, Nnemdi and Emeka by his side. They were on a mission to find Nneoma and retrieve the letter. As they approached Nneoma's hostel, Emeka's heart began to pound. What would he say to her? How would she react? Nnemdi seemed to sense his nervousness. Hey, it's going to be okay, she said softly. Emeka nodded, taking a deep breath. He steeled himself and walked into the hostel, his friends following close behind. They found Nneoma in the common room, studying for an exam. She looked up as they approached, a hint of curiosity on her face. Hey, Emeka, she said, her voice neutral. Emeka's heart skipped a beat. She knew. She had to know. Nneoma, can we talk? Emeka asked, trying to sound calm. Nneoma raised an eyebrow but nodded. What's up? She asked. Emeka took a deep breath and launched into an explanation of the letter, leaving out no details. Nneoma listened intently, her expression unreadable. As Emeka finished speaking, Nneoma looked down at her hands, a faint blush rising to her cheeks. I read the letter, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Emeka's heart sank. He had been hoping against hope that she hadn't read it. What did you think? Emeka asked, his voice tentative. Nneoma looked up, her eyes sparkling with amusement. I think you're very brave, Emeka, she said. Emeka's face grew hot. Brave? He didn't feel brave. He felt like he was going to pass out. But then Nneoma's expression turned serious. I have to admit, I was surprised. I had no idea you felt that way about me. Emeka's heart skipped a beat. She was talking about the letter. She was talking about his feelings. Emeka's heart was racing as he waited for Nneoma's response. He had expected her to be angry, or embarrassed, or even to laugh in his face. But instead, she looked at him with a curious expression, as if she was trying to figure him out. I have to admit, I'm flattered, she said finally, a small smile playing on her lips. Emeka's eyes widened in surprise. Flattered? He hadn't expected that. Really? He asked, his voice tentative. Nneoma nodded. Yes, really. It takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there like that. Emeka felt a wave of relief wash over him. Maybe this wasn't going to be a disaster after all. But then Nneoma's expression turned serious. However, I have to be honest with you, Emeka. I don't feel the same way. Emeka's heart sank. He had been hoping against hope that she might feel the same way. But as he looked at Nneoma, he saw the kindness in her eyes, and he knew that she was genuinely sorry. It's okay, he said, trying to sound casual. I understand. Nneoma smiled, and Emeka felt a pang of sadness. He knew that he would never have a chance with her now. But as they talked some more, Emeka realized that Nneoma was still the same person he had admired from afar. She was kind, intelligent, and beautiful. And as they parted ways, Emeka felt a sense of gratitude towards her. She had rejected him, but she had done it with kindness and compassion. As he walked away, Emeka couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would he find someone else who felt the same way about him? And then he saw Nnemdi waiting for him by the hostel entrance. She smiled at him, and Emeka felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, his love life was not over yet. Emeka walked towards Nnemdi, feeling a mix of emotions. He was still reeling from Nneoma's rejection, but at the same time, he was grateful for her kindness. As he approached Nnemdi, he noticed that she was looking at him with a concerned expression. Hey, how did it go? She asked. Emeka shrugged. It was okay, I guess. She didn't feel the same way, but she was really nice about it. Nnemdi nodded sympathetically. I'm sorry, Emeka. I know how much you liked her. Emeka smiled wryly. Yeah, I guess I did. But it's okay. I'll survive. Nnemdi smiled back at him, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. Emeka felt a spark of connection that he couldn't ignore. Hey, thanks for being here for me, Emeka said, feeling a sense of gratitude towards Nnemdi. Nnemdi's smile faltered for a moment, and Emeka wondered if he had said something wrong. But then she smiled again, and her eyes sparkled with warmth. No problem, Emeka. That's what friends are for, she said. Emeka felt a pang of disappointment. Friends? Was that all they were? But as he looked at Nnemdi, he realized that he didn't know what he wanted. All he knew was that he felt drawn to her in a way that he couldn't explain. As they stood there, the tension between them was palpable. Emeka knew that something was about to change between them. But what? As they stood there, Emeka couldn't help but notice the way Nnemdi's eyes sparkled in the sunlight. He felt a flutter in his chest, and suddenly, he was aware of her in a way he hadn't been before. Nnemdi, too, seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. She looked up at Emeka, and their eyes met in a way that felt almost electric. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the tension between them building. Emeka felt like he was drowning in her eyes, and he couldn't look away. Then, suddenly, Nnemdi smiled, and the spell was broken. Hey, let's get out of here, she said, nodding towards the campus gates. I could use some fresh air. Emeka nodded, feeling a little dazed. Yeah, sure, he said, falling into step beside her. As they walked, Emeka couldn't help but steal glances at Nnemdi. He felt like he was seeing her for the first time, and he was struck by her beauty. Nnemdi, too, seemed to be aware of the change in atmosphere. She caught Emeka's eye and smiled, and Emeka felt his heart skip a beat. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound being the rustling of leaves beneath their feet. Emeka felt a sense of peace wash over him, and he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. As they approached the campus gates, Nnemdi turned to Emeka and smiled. Thanks for walking with me, she said. I needed this. Emeka smiled back, feeling a sense of connection with her. In a time, he said. I needed it too. As they parted ways, Emeka couldn't help but wonder what was happening between them. Was it just friendship, or was something more developing? He didn't have the answer, but he knew one thing for sure. He wanted to spend more time with Nnemdi. Over the next few days, Emeka and Nnemdi found themselves spending more and more time together. They would meet up for coffee, go for walks, or just sit and talk. Emeka couldn't believe how much he enjoyed her company. She was smart, funny, and had a quick wit that always left him laughing. Nnemdi, too, seemed to be enjoying herself. She would smile at Emeka's jokes, and her eyes would light up when they talked about their shared interests. As they spent more time together, Emeka started to realize that his feelings for Nnemdi went beyond friendship. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he felt a spark of attraction whenever she was near. One day, as they were walking across campus, Nnemdi turned to Emeka and asked, Hey, have you ever been to the beach? Emeka shook his head. No, I haven't, but I've always wanted to go. Nnemdi's eyes lit up. I love the beach. We should go together sometime. Emeka's heart skipped a beat. Was she asking him out on a date? I'd love to, he said, trying to sound casual. Nnemdi smiled, and Emeka felt his heart soar. As they continued walking, Emeka couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them. Were they just friends, or was something more developing? He didn't have the answer, but he knew one thing for sure. He was excited to find out. The day of the beach trip finally arrived, and Emeka was excited. He had been looking forward to this all week. Nnemdi met him at the entrance of the university, looking beautiful in a yellow sundress. Her hair was tied up in a ponytail, and she had a big smile on her face. "Hey," she said, as Emeka approached her. "I'm so excited for today." Emeka grinned. "Me too," he said. "I've never been to the beach before." Nnemdi's eyes widened. "Really? Well, you're in for a treat." They took a taxi to the beach, chatting excitedly all the way. When they arrived, Emeka was blown away by the sight of the ocean stretching out before him. Nnemdi laughed at his reaction. "I told you it was beautiful," she said. They spent the day swimming, building sandcastles, and laughing together. Emeka felt carefree and happy, and he knew that it was all because of Nnemdi. As the sun began to set, they sat down on a blanket to watch the stars come out. Emeka felt Nnemdi's hand brush against his, and he knew that he wanted to hold it, but he was afraid of ruining the moment. What if she didn't feel the same way? As they sat there in comfortable silence, Emeka knew that he had to take the risk. He slowly reached out and took Nnemdi's hand, feeling a spark of electricity as their palms touched. Nnemdi didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled at him, and Emeka knew that he had made the right move. As Emeka held Nnemdi's hand, he felt a sense of nervous excitement. He had been wanting to do that for weeks, and now that he finally had, he felt like he was on cloud nine. Nnemdi, too, seemed to be enjoying the moment. She smiled at Emeka, and he could see the sparkle in her eyes. They sat there in silence for a while, watching the stars twinkle to life above them. Emeka felt like time had stopped, and all that mattered was this moment, right here, right now. As the night wore on, Emeka knew that he had to tell Nnemdi how he felt. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "Nnemdi," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I have to tell you something." Nnemdi looked at him, her eyes curious. "What is it?" she asked. Emeka's heart skipped a beat. "I think I might be falling for you," he said, his voice trembling. Nnemdi's expression changed, and for a moment, Emeka thought he saw a glimmer of uncertainty. But then she smiled, and Emeka's heart soared. "I think I might be falling for you too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emeka's heart leapt with joy. He had done it. He had taken the risk, and it had paid off. As they sat there, holding hands and looking into each other's eyes, Emeka knew that this was just the beginning of their love story. As the night wore on, Emeka and Nnemdi sat together on the beach, watching the stars twinkle above them. They talked and laughed, their hearts filled with joy and excitement. Emeka knew that he had found someone special in Nnemdi. She was kind, smart, and beautiful, and he couldn't believe his luck. As the night drew to a close, Emeka walked Nnemdi home, his arm around her shoulders. They stood outside her door, reluctant to say goodbye. "I had an amazing time tonight," Nnemdi said, looking up at Emeka with sparkling eyes. Emeka smiled, his heart full of happiness. "Me too," he said. "I'm so glad I took the risk and told you how I feel." Nnemdi smiled back, her face radiant with joy. "I'm glad you did too," she said. Emeka leaned in, his heart pounding with excitement. He knew that this was the start of something special. As their lips met in a soft, sweet kiss, Emeka knew that he had found his soulmate in Nnemdi. And as they pulled away, smiling at each other, Emeka knew that this was just the beginning of their love story.